Hi, Elmer.
Hello.
Does my background work?
Yep.
Hmm?
Yes, yes, it does.
It's bleeding into my face. Okay lang.
Into your eyeglasses, not naman
It's
face.
at my eyeglasses. Okay. Sige. Good afternoon to everyone. We'll start in a few minutes. Good afternoon again to everyone. We'll just wait a few more minutes. Acknowledging our panelists who are already here. Dr. Nash, Prof. Rob. Good afternoon.
Hello.
Hi. We'll just wait a few more minutes and then we'll start. But I think we have enough. Sam, could you confirm?
Yes po, okay na po.
We're okay now. We're good. All right. So good afternoon once again. Welcome to the Financial Inclusion Lab Brown Bag session for the Financing the Future Innovation Challenge in partnership with PhilDev. I would like to acknowledge their presence today. Sam is here. I'm not sure if Kevin is here already, but the whole team of PhilDev. Thank you for joining us as well. So this is, of course, brought to you by the Inclusive Growth School, by Civica Asian Development Academy. So I am Larry, as one of your mentors and co-convener at the Financial Inclusion Lab. So at convener, our main objective is to engage all the stakeholders in the ecosystem of the financial inclusion and aim to solve real life problems on financial inclusion. So our discourse topic for this afternoon is, of course, none other than financial inclusion status in the Philippines. So our objective this afternoon is to set the context on the current state of financial inclusion. We will attempt to define the factors or reasons for the gaps and what are the goals. What are the available options to address these gaps? And based on our criteria for financial inclusion, which of these gaps could be addressed by innovation? So for today, we will be covering the following topics: an overview of financial inclusion evidence, remittances and for peace use cases, and I'll be presenting an end user or persona experience. So as mentioned, I would like to welcome our esteemed guest for this afternoon. I'll make more introductions later. So I'm just as excited as our innovators to learn and to hear from you today. So with us are Dr. Nash Badiri, Miss Yuna Liang, I'm not sure if she's here already, and Prof. Rob Nazal. So nice to see all of you again. So now remember, guys, our challenge question. So how the challenge question for our social innovators is how might we improve the access to financial resources and services by low-income families in the Philippines. So to start us off, I would like to introduce a video. Oh, sorry. With regards to the video, we will just upload it on our Facebook page because it's 20 minutes long. It's an end user experience, which is an interview with a kasambahay. Okay, but I would like to instead briefly share with you the at-risk persona, okay, through two case presentations. So just going to share my screen. I think that's the one. Okay. I guess you could see my screen. Can I see? Prof. Rob? Can you see my
Yes,
screen?
po. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So this is the at-risk youth persona. I'll tell you two stories. Okay. The first is JG, who's a college dropout because his previous school only offered the scholarship for the first year and he couldn't afford the regular fees anymore. So he is the eldest of three children and considered the breadwinner. Although his mother works for a living, his father is estranged and into drug use. Since he is now studying and working only part-time, he's not able to contribute financially as much. So he's only able to give 1,000 pesos to his mother, unlike before when he was working full-time and not studying, he was able to give 3,000 pesos. Now, he has arranged to borrow money from a friend. He only needs 3,000 pesos to be able to give to his mother because his mother needs it at that time. But his girlfriend would also like for him to borrow another 2,000 pesos, which she would help also pay because she has a job. He had already used up his required minimum savings of 2,000 pesos, and he is a bit concerned because this is being scored as part of their performance in the program. So this JG is actually a beneficiary of a social enterprise who helped the at-risk youth to gain college education. So, but to be in the program, of course, they need to meet certain qualifications. So one of that is to have savings. He is also worried that penalties would end up using what's left in his bank account, which is below the requirements. At that time, I think they haven't fully taken advantage of the lower interest rate, lower deposit rate, because now there's 100 pesos lang that is being required and you can open an account. But at that time, it was 2,000 pesos. So he was worried about that, and for a monthly income of, at that time, 10,458, he had to pay for rent, for water, for electricity. He needed to pay off his loan, and then he needed to give monthly 1,000 for his mother. So if 20% should go to his savings, then he would be left with 2,443 or 111 pesos per day for food and transportation. So this is JG, a college dropout, and now the breadwinner along with his mother for a family of five. So, but when asked how much he looks up to his mother in a scale of 1 to 10, his response was a heartfelt 11. Okay, the next case is RT, of course not the real name. Okay, RT is a college graduate and now working in the Tondo Community Initiative, a nonprofit organization based in Tondo, Manila. RT is a product of a broken family and a high school dropout as well. He spent most of his time with his friends in the streets and would often steal money to get by. He only turned away from his group of friends when they started doing drugs. When RT entered the social innovation program, he was with 4 other learners. On the first week that they started as part-time working students, one quit already due to lack of funds for transportation and food to go to work and school. The parents wanted the learner or the at-risk youth or the youth to just get a full-time job instead. After 1 month, another learner followed for the same reason. And by the first year in the social enterprise, RT was the only one left out of the 4 in his batch. So his parents were not supportive also, but he was determined to finish his college education and earn at the same time. He was able to save some money, but it all went to the medical expense of his mother when she got sick and eventually died. So RT was a high school dropout and now an alumni of the Social Innovation Program, meaning he was able to finish his program and graduate from college. He graduated in 2018. He's now earning more than enough to support himself and his family as a breadwinner. He works as a youth mentor and he is giving back to his community through his job. So I'd like now to share with you how we look at the development problem here. So the employed young adults at risk living with their low-income households are vulnerable to the family conditions, social and environmental factors that lead to the lack of financial stability. Dependency on their income as the breadwinner in the family at times bring about stress and pressure to provide at all possible costs, like leaving school to earn a living, thereby exposing themselves to the vicious cycle of poverty. So the theory of change is that providing financial education to the household, meaning their families, or whoever they consider to be family or their household that they're living with, will increase their support to the employed youth in adapting financial management, despite of the dependency on them to provide as breadwinners. The behavior change will help keep the youth in school and will empower them to somehow increase the financial capability of their households that can lead to the achievement of their goals, such as having their own business, securing their health, and giving back, like sending their siblings to school.
Ako na lang.
So in this
Wait
case,
lang.
the intervention was on financial management, not just for the at-risk youth, but for the family as well. Okay, so now I'm gonna stop share. Oh, hi Kevin. Okay, so we will be presenting other personas as we go along, both today, in our Facebook page. As I mentioned, the interview with Kasambahay, we'll post it there. And on our upcoming brown bag session on December 8th, we will also present two personas, which are the fisher folk, farmer, and street vendor, or a vendor at the informal sector. So now I would like to ask us to make sure you're all still with me. What SDGs does financial inclusion support? Can anyone tell me? What SDGs does financial inclusion support?
No poverty.
No poverty, yes. What else? Thank you, Cherry. All SDGs, yes. But so financial inclusion is a key enabler to reducing poverty and boosting prosperity. So it has been as we know, all the SDG goals are interrelated. But financial inclusion, I would say, strongly supports 7 of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Okay, so these are SDG 1, no poverty, good health and well-being, quality education, decent work and economic growth, industry innovation and infrastructure, reduce inequality, and responsible consumption and production. So I think it is important that as we formulate the desired results or outcomes of our innovation, we are also aware of the overarching goal or impact that we would like to make. So as I read the thoughts and ideas that you have on financial inclusion, which you have written on your registration on the Innovation Challenge, it is clear to me that 2 important criteria or metrics, if you will, that we could set to be able to say that we have met our financial inclusion goals is adoption and behavior change. So in the next 2 weeks, my challenge to the mentors and facilitators is to make more apparent what the strategies or key activities would be put in place to ensure adoption and promote behavior change. What is the behavior change that we want to see, and who do we and for whom, and how do we measure that? So now for our first topic, let me introduce our guest speaker who will be discussing the overview of financial inclusion evidence. Okay, so Dr. Nash S. Badiri is the Country Director for Innovations for Poverty Action, or IPA Philippines, and Chief Manager of IPA's diverse portfolio of evaluations and research. She holds a doctorate degree in public administration from the University of the Philippines, Diliman, has an MA in development studies from the University of Manchester, a master's in international studies, and a BA in political science from the University of the Philippines as well. She was named one of Manila's 40 under 40 international development leaders by DevEx in 2013, and UK Education Ambassador for the Philippines by the British Embassy in 2015. So it is with great honor and pleasure to introduce Dr. Nash Badiri. You may take the floor.
Thank you, Lee.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Leah.
Thanks for inviting us. We're very happy to present today. I know medyo time constrained, but hopefully we'll be able to go through the slides that we have for everyone. Yeah, so maybe I should start sharing.
Okay.
Let me see. I think I need to do the slideshow. Okay, so I'm wondering if it's showing up, Leah, in your side. Okay, sounds great. Yeah, so yeah, good afternoon, everyone. As I mentioned earlier, we're very happy to be here. I'm with my colleague, Yuna Liang, our research coordinator, as well as Innovations for Poverty Action. And we're here today to share some evidence on financial inclusion, specifically on financial education, digital finance, and remittances. So we'll give you just a brief introduction of IPA. I'm not so sure if most of you have heard of us yet. And then we'll have a Q&A, and then maybe later, I think Yuna will also speak about our studies in remittances. Okay. So about IPA, in a nutshell, what we do is that we conduct rigorous research using randomized controlled trials to promote evidence-based policies. And the reason why we want evidence-based policies, as most of you are already aware, is because we want cost-effective programs, especially programs that are proven to reduce poverty. Our vision is that if we have more evidence of what works, that can contribute to less poverty. But we've seen so far, in many fields, especially in development, that there's little evidence or little investment in discovering what works. So for-profit firms, for example, you see a lot of R&D investments, but in development, we see a very small proportion of funds going to research and development, or trying to figure out innovations and testing those innovations. And so the solution, as we see it, is that it's really looking at limited evidence. So because we see that we don't have a lot of evidence on what works to help the poor, and of the limited evidence that we have, there's also limited use. It could be various reasons. Maybe the evidence that we have is very technical. It's not really as relevant to policymakers or decision makers. And so that results to ineffective programs and policies and wasted resources. The solution is really very simple, which is also sort of our theory of change, as an organization, is to design and evaluate potential solutions to poverty problems in different sectors, mobilize support of decision makers to use evidence. So we work very closely with policymakers in the Philippines to use evidence. And that would result to better programs and policies. And ultimately, if you have more evidence, then that contributes to less poverty. IPA works with different stakeholders as well. We work very closely with academics. in many universities around the world. In the Philippines, we work with various government agencies. We've completed projects with the DOLE, DSWD, DAR. We're working with the Supreme Court, the Department of Education. We also work with implementing partners and service providers, local nonprofits and businesses. And we also partner closely with our funders, from many of which are very much interested in identifying innovations in the development sector. Our approach is quite simple. We work with decision makers and policymakers to identify problems, especially related to poverty. We work closely to design using frontier knowledge in psychology, economics, political science, and to design and identify solutions in these sectors. We evaluate these solutions using rigorous methodology. And once we have proof of concept, we promote the scale up of effective ideas. And all throughout this process, we champion the use of evidence to make sure that, that evidence is being used every step of the way. We have about 750 ongoing and completed studies around the world in different areas such as agriculture. We work with DAR in the Philippines in education. We have a 5-year partnership with the DepEd in financial inclusion. We're also working with the Bangko Sentral of the Philippines, as well as governance, health, peace and recovery, SMEs, and social protection. So in this slide, you can see that I've highlighted 3 important researchers who work in JPAL and IPA's network. So they recently won the Nobel Prize in Economics, specifically, for the experimental approach that they're using to alleviate global poverty. And this experimental approach is what we call the randomized controlled trials. And I think this is quite important because, it gives us really, an idea of how to move forward given the many questions that we have in terms of a lot of the development, programs that are being implemented. One example that I've cited here is microcredit, right? And so a lot of you may have heard that, microcredit has been, mentioned as changing the lives of the poor, especially changing the lives of peace in many parts of the world. But at the same time, you have another side of people who argue that microcredit is really not helping and that it's putting poor people more into debt and poverty. So how do we know who is right? But when it comes to these kinds of debates, and we think that randomized controlled trial evaluations, because it builds evidence on what works using a rigorous methodology, can really help us in terms of understanding, what are the impacts of these programs. And so when you do a randomized controlled trial, you randomly split the population into 2 groups. You have a program group, a treatment group, as we also call them, and then a comparison group. And so we look at the outcomes for both, and that's how we measure impact. So for the microcredit studies, we did about 7 randomized evaluations around the world. I think one of which is in the Philippines. And what we did was, we used RCTs to understand the impact of these microcredit programs. And that includes splitting the population in randomly and assigning them randomly to both treatment and control, making sure that the characteristics of these 2 groups are the same, right? And so they're balanced. And the results of the study show that, while microcredit helps some businesses establish themselves, especially new businesses, it's not really the silver bullet to bring millions of people out of poverty. We don't see a lot of big changes in terms of income, and it's also on household welfare, and that was such a big result, and an issue that came out with this set of studies. In this slide, you can see that while there are no harmful effects, there are also barely any transformative impacts. And we also see that, in terms of, the studies that were conducted in many parts of the world, while business profit may have increased, business revenue, it's not the case for all of the countries that are implementing microcredit programs. And so the question now is, what's the alternative to microcredit? While microcredit is not that transformative as we thought it would be, maybe the question is thinking about how we should design microcredit in a way that's better in keeping with the needs of the beneficiaries or the clients, right? And maybe that's the one thing that we should be doing. We should be testing new ways of implementing microfinance and microcredit. One example also that we can take a look at is that poverty in itself is quite complex. So maybe a package of interventions would work better than just like giving one, focusing on one program. And that's what we've been also trying to test here in the Philippines. It's called a graduation of the ultra poor study. And this is really a big push program that aims to address many challenges of poverty simultaneously, including support for daily needs, as well as coaching support, health insurance, and many others. So going back to financial inclusion research, as we've seen, it can be quite complicated. When you say that there's financial access, it doesn't mean that there's financial use, right? The use of these products. And so it's very important to know that just because you're giving access, you also have to make sure that there's usage of these financial products. There's also a question of how do we accurately measure financial use? And because people use financial products in many different ways, some of them informally as well as when you're running surveys or maybe asking people on the street, there could be some recall bias. So you also have to be very careful when you do these types of research. And definitely really, needing to account for diverse uses as well as heterogeneous impacts of financial inclusion. So I'll go through the evidence on financial inclusion very quickly. I know I don't have a lot of time. Usually we have more than, I think, almost an hour when we present these slides. So what I'll do is I'll just identify key themes for today. One is on financial education, and second one is on digital finance. Okay. So as we know, all of you probably are quite familiar with this already. Especially on how how financial education has been implemented. The conventional way is usually in a classroom setting, in-person instruction. Oftentimes, it's catered to specific groups. There's been a wide variation in frequency, duration, and content. And the goal is that to improve financial behavior by sharing facts and concepts related to participants' financial knowledge, skills, and attitudes. Right. I'll just move this. Okay. And why is it important? A lot of people think that financial education is very significant because they link financial literacy and capability as well to financial education. Right. And so if you ask people, they really value financial education, especially since they think that it's the most effective way to improve access to finance among low-income borrowers. But what do we know about the effectiveness of conventional financial education? As we've seen in many of the studies that were being run is that there's really quite mixed results. So a body of evidence has been showing that the conventional approach to financial education has not been so successful, especially in giving lasting knowledge or in changing people's behavior, financial behavior. We also see that the cost seems to be very high, but there's very low demand, and oftentimes, depending on the target group that's being, given the financial education, you would need to sort of find a way to get them into the classroom to attend these financial education trainings. But we see that there are new directions in financial education. And I think that's the important point. Definitely, we have to go beyond the conventional way of implementing financial education. And we should look to the evidence on how to better improve running these types of programs. One, we see that there's evidence that suggests that these successful programs on financial education have one or more of the following characteristics. One, it's simple and actionable. So you give very, very concrete steps to participants, but not too complicated as well that they'll forget once they step out of the door. It also has to be personalized, right? And so you have to understand the needs as well as the environment and also the context of participants. It also has to be timely. And there have been such studies around here, when people are about to make financial decisions, for example, whether it's about their pensions, it's about savings, or even credit, microcredit, you have to make sure that, the financial education program that you're running is at that point where they're, trying to make those important decisions for themselves and for their families. And fourth, it also has to be convenient and entertaining. Asking people to come to a classroom and attend these types of programs may not be as convenient for many, especially if you're a farmer or if you work in, certain sectors. And given that, you have a lot, in terms of, the issues that you're thinking about on a day-to-day basis, you also have to make sure that this is something that will grab their attention. Lastly, it's also good, to think about targeting these programs to young people, especially specifically the youth, because we've seen that there seems to be promising results, when you implement these kinds of programs for young people. So here I'm going to give the example of a study that we did in the Dominican Republic and India, which was also implemented in the Philippines. This was in partnership with Ideas 42. And the target was micro entrepreneurs. So Ideas 42 had this program called Rules of Thumb or Heuristics Training, where they give, they look at, very simple, actionable steps that can be shared to, micro entrepreneurs. And so they used interactive voice response. And at the same time, they looked at face-to-face orientation session and also using mobile phone-based training messages, right? And and the results were quite promising as well. And I think this goes back to what I mentioned earlier, that simple and actionable steps really matter when you're implementing financial education programs. So now I'll move on to digital finance and just go through very, very quickly to some of the evidence in digital finance. Right. So as you see, that digital payments as well is very, very promising, specifically now in the Philippines in this time where a lot of people are sort of limited in terms of movement, and the government is also working with financial service providers to transfer cash payments, emergency subsidies. And I think this is quite an important aspect of financial inclusion as well. And so we see that, digital payments can lead to cost savings, right? And this is something that a lot of us already know, especially some of the transaction costs, both for senders and receivers. It also helps with resilience, helping households smooth unexpected income shocks by providing quick access to money or support from their broader social network. We also see the link here between financial inclusion and women's empowerment, and that digital payments have been giving women greater privacy and control over resources, which can in turn promote women's economic participation and empowerment. And lastly, you see that digital products may encourage confidence and trust in financial institutions and increase account use. And this is very important in the Philippines because I'm sure most of you have already read the BSP Financial Inclusion Report that one of the barriers to getting more people into formal financial, formal finance is that there seems to be a lack of trust at some level. So here in this slide, you can see that, looking at G2P payments, right, and efficiency of government payments, we see that digital transfers reduce sender and recipient costs, they improve effectiveness. In several studies that were conducted, one example that's mentioned here is in Niger, households received cash transfers via mobile phone. They had lower travel and wait times and higher food security. At the same time, because there was ongoing conflict in the area at that time, it was also much safer for them to receive those cash transfers via mobile phone. In terms of women's empowerment, we saw that delivering cash transfers electronically increased the likelihood that the recipient who was a woman was solely responsible for obtaining the transfer, and that households in which women received cash transfers were actually more resilient. They had diet diversity, and that their children were actually consuming more meals per day. In terms of poverty alleviation, we see that lowering the transaction costs as well of informal risk sharing was very important. Users of mobile money platform in Kenya that receive funds from a wider network of senders, located far away, they were able to absorb large negative shocks, while non-users had to reduce consumption by 7 to 10%. So that's an important factor in resilience as well. And also in women's empowerment, similar to other cases, women with access to mobile money exercise more choice over their occupation. As I mentioned, this is really the important link between financial inclusion as well and women's empowerment, and bringing them more into business also. In terms of income, we see a significant impact as well, especially in female-headed households living in extreme poverty, as well as female-headed households living on less than on $2 a day. So we see that incomes have improved as well. In terms of labor force participation, we see that these private payments made an impact in terms of helping women think about their decision to work, and so this is a very important issue as well in terms of gender norms and labor force participation. In India, one study looked at depositing work payments into female-owned bank accounts, which led to a significant increase in both work and economic engagement, especially among women, despite prevailing gender norms. In terms of labor force participation, we see that women who received the treatment were more likely to have worked for pay in the past year and had 30% higher earnings as well. In terms of trust in financial institutions, as I mentioned, it is also quite relevant for us in the Philippines. We see that digital payments, digital finance encourage confidence and trust in financial institutions, and there's many different ways to understand that as well. In Mexico, what they did was beneficiaries of a cash transfer program use debit cards where they're able to really check their balances frequently, and as a result, they were more likely to report that they trust in the bank, right? In terms of account utilization, as reported, trust in the bank increased, savings balances increased as well. And so I think this goes hand in hand of being able to see how much you have in the bank and knowing that it's there for you, and being able to use also these financial products more frequently. So we see that evidence has been showing us that there's been benefits of digital payment, but how do we promote adoption and usage, given that in the Philippines as well, this has been an issue now that there's less take-up of digital finance and digital payments. So what do we know about in promoting take-up of digital financial products? One, I think all of you are also quite aware of this already, that users are quite price sensitive, especially in terms of the transaction costs. If you put a lot of transaction costs and increase these costs, there will be people are less willing to pay for mobile money services, and also they may not actually pick up these financial products, right? And so there's a perception of that high fees really is a barrier to mobile money usage among new users, as well as looking very specifically on transaction costs. Users who live farther away, from cash out agents, use their accounts less, not just because they may have to pay some transaction cost with the cash agent, but also that they would have to pay for transportation costs to get to the cash out agent from wherever they are. Right? We also see that interventions to increase mobile money take-up would be quite useful. So in Bangladesh, a study found that providing trainings on how to use this product they call bKash, which was a mobile banking service, help clients understand and use the service more. This includes sharing with them steps and protocols, giving them hands-on practice on sending transfers, facilitation of sign-up process, giving them this information as well as coaching them as well, and increase the take-up of bKash as well in the rural control group to 70%. In Peru, the study tested the impact of trusted social networks on the adoption of mobile money. So, looking at the social networks of clients as well, it found that both lack of information and that lack of trust in the person who provides information are barriers to take up of mobile money. So, looking at digital credit this time, I'll look at two key outcomes. One is credit access and resilience. We see that the emerging evidence shows that digital credit expands credit access, but it does not substitute for other forms of finance, especially to populations who do not have access to formal finance. And second, in terms of resilience, we see that it does increase household resilience, especially when it comes to negative shocks. So, as I mentioned, digital credit seems to expand, access. And I think, as you are also aware, if you can access loans very quickly using your own devices, that will definitely expand, your ability to access these loans. And in Kenya, this is exactly what's happening. Access to digital loan products brought in a meaningful expansion of credit for eligible households. And that was about an 11% increase in the likelihood of these households to take out a loan. At the same time, in terms of resilience, households were less likely to forgo any expense in response to a negative shock that they're experiencing in their household. For example, negative shocks are, maybe a death in the household or someone having to need healthcare and others. Okay. In terms of consumption, there seems to be an increase in the money that they're spending for education, specifically when they have to spend on emergency and health events, and that they're able to adjust given these shocks as well in their households. So yeah, so we've seen that digital credit has some benefits, but how about the potential risks, such as over-indebtedness and default? I think this has been a key issue as well, not just with digital credit, but also other forms of credit, such as microcredit, the traditional microcredit. And I think this is the reason why, even when we're thinking about digital credit and digital finance, we always have to be proactive about consumer protection, especially if we want to build trust in the system, in the financial system. So one study that was done in Mexico looked at loan data from a full set of approved clients. And they made the loan delivery time longer from the basic 10 hours that they usually do to 20 hours. And making that delivery time longer actually reduced to a default by 20%. So maybe this is also something to think about. Delaying loans may have provided higher returns than very quick access loans, and that borrowers were valuing the product more because they had to wait a little bit longer, I suppose. And so it's very important as well to look into this some more, using data on how they've been using digital credit and how delays affect the demand for credit. But this seems to be an interesting way of looking at how borrowers can value the product more, and and make sure that they're not just taking out loans in the spur of the moment, and really thinking about the loans that they're taking out. Okay. Another study that is quite relevant here is looking at product disclosure, and we saw that disclosing costs to consumers in a behaviorally informed way rather than in long and difficult to understand documents increases their comprehension and gives them really a good understanding of what they're getting into, which is also quite important. A study in Mexico and Peru found that providing the standardized key fact statement, or what they call KFS, significantly improves the ability of consumers to make financial decisions, especially with regards to credit products. And it's very effective for individuals that are financially illiterate as well. So we see that digital finance is very promising, and it's really creating opportunities to connect individuals, especially the disadvantaged, to formal financial services. Emerging evidence, as we've seen, these are just some of the examples that are being implemented in many parts of the world, and that we see that there could be a positive impact, not just on poverty alleviation, but also on economic resilience and women's empowerment. Definitely, we would need more evidence on how to increase take-up and usage, and especially in the Philippines as well. We see this as a key issue and a barrier, and that it's very important to understand how we can optimize products and put in the regulations for consumer protection. Some of the key takeaways as well, looking at the evidence in these two key aspects of financial inclusion. One, we can't really rely on hopes and instincts to know what works. And I think this is really a key message here, especially as all of you are working on your projects. And that, just because, we have an instinct that something's going to work, we don't really know whether it's going to work until we test what we're doing. That's very, very important. For IPA, what we do is that we really want to make sure that there's partnerships between researchers, the private sector, government, and NGOs, especially in answering these questions in real time. So this is really something that would be answered with a variety of stakeholders as well. We also see that there's still a lot of questions that remain, and that we need to build more evidence and implement more rigorous studies, especially in optimizing products, learning, thinking about how we can increase take-up and usage, having a human-centered design. I think that's a very important aspect as well, especially if we're looking at a certain segment of the population, and if you're thinking about expanding financial inclusion to a certain segment, we really have to think about the design of these financial products as well. Especially, for example, if you're targeting, the ultra poor, some savings may not be top of mind. And so if you're thinking about a savings product, you have to really think about it from the perspective of someone in that situation as well. We also have to think about, looking at the gender appropriate design, especially since, there seems to be very important links between financial inclusion and women's empowerment as well. There's a lot of questions on the impact of finance on other development goals, such as climate resilience, food, education, and others. Lastly, consumer protection issues are also very important, and that is very critical to address these early on when we're thinking about financial products. And lastly, there's it's not one size fits all. No, one size does not fit all when it comes to financial inclusion. So it's very important to understand, the population that you're trying to work with, and making sure that you're designing these products appropriately as well. Okay. So I think that ends my presentation for now.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nash. So for the Q&A part, we'll do it at the end
Okay.
in our during the open forum. But thank you very much
Yeah.
for keen on financial education and digital finance, I think you hit the nail on the head there. So thank you very much. So for our next speaker, I'd like to call on Miss Yuna Liang. I hope I pronounced that properly. She would be discussing the remittance use cases. Just want to check if she's here already.
Yes, hi Leah.
Hi, yeah. So I'd like to introduce you. Miss Yuna is a research coordinator for Innovations for Poverty Action, same organization, IPA Philippines. She previously worked in London for the Children's Investment Fund Foundation, or CIFF, in the monitoring and evaluation team. She holds an MSc in International Development from the London School of Economics and Political Science. So welcome, Yuna, and thank you very much for being here.
Thanks, Leah, and thank you again for inviting us to this event today. And hi, everyone. Nice to meet you. So I will share my screen now. And if at any point, if you cannot hear me okay, please let me know because my internet connection is sometimes a bit unstable. And okay, can you see my screen now? Sorry, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can see your screen.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you. So today I'm glad to be sharing with you the labeled remittances study, which IPA has been implemented since 2017. It's led by two economists, Professor Dinya from the University of Michigan and Professor Giuseppe from Sapienza University of Rome. This is a proof of concept research where we tested a product for OFWs to label their remittances as for specific uses. And as Nash said earlier, we cannot rely on hopes and instincts to know what works. We need to test. And I hope that this study serves as a good example of testing an innovation or a product. Okay, so I will start. So today I would show you, first of all, some background information of the study so that you know like why we conducted this study and why we think it's important. And then I will show you the research design, the intervention design, and also lastly, the preliminary results from the data analysis. So I'm not going to present it as if it's an academic paper, so there will not be a lot of statistics. I will just share more on the ideas behind the project and also the product design. Okay, so first of all, why did we conduct this study? So I'm sure you all know very well the important role of remittances, especially in the development of the Philippines and actually globally. Remittances is one of the largest financial flow into low and middle income countries. For example, in 2019, the total amount of remittances going into low and middle income countries was more than $500 billion. So it was actually even more than foreign aid. So given this huge magnitude, remittances actually have the potential to significantly impact a wide range of development outcomes. However, migrants usually prefer for the remittances to be spent on items that have longer term development impact, such as investment in education or in household enterprises, because they are away, they are so far away from home. They have very little ability to monitor or to control how the remittances are actually being spent by the recipients. And in contrast, recipients usually prefer to spend the remittances on immediate consumption. And as a result, this may discourage migrants to send more of the money that they earn to home. So the question becomes, So how can OFWs better control the remittances that they are sending home? And one study that was conducted by the same researchers who led this labor remittance study previously in Rome offers some interesting insight to this question. So I will tell you more about this EduPay study that was done in Rome with OFWs there. So it was a lab in the field. It involves about 500 OFWs in Rome. And in that study, researchers tested two ways to help OFWs to have more control over the remittance use. And we call them a hard mechanism and a soft mechanism. And by hard mechanism, we mean that the OFWs, they were given the chance to use EduPay, which was a financial product by which they can send remittances directly to the schools which their children go to, right? And the soft mechanism it just means that the OFWs had the chance to label the remittances as for education purposes, so that the recipients would know that the migrants want this money to be spent on education, right? And then the researchers compare the differences in the migrants' remittance behavior between these two mechanisms. And very interestingly, they found that the OFWs were willing to send 15% more remittances if they were given the ability to label the remittances for education. So the soft mechanism could increase remittance by 15%, while the hard mechanism actually had a similar effect. So it also increased remittances, but not much more if compared to the soft mechanism, right? So both mechanisms worked, but the effects were very similar. However, you can imagine, right, the EduPay product is more complex because to arrange international payments into different schools, that could be quite a costly and complicated process. While labeling is less costly, it's almost cost-free actually. It's simpler to implement and therefore is more scalable. So that is why after this EduPay study, the researchers decided to test the labeling method further and in a larger scale in the real world setting. And that led us to the label remittance study. Okay. And in the label remittance study, we try to answer two key research questions. The first question is, will improving OFW's ability to channel their remittances toward their preferred users by labeling increase the volume of remittances that they send, right? If they can label the remittance, will they send more money? And question two, what is the impact of labeling remittances on the beneficiary household's expenditures in relation to the migrant's preferences, right? So now the migrant labeled the remittance, but will the recipients actually adjust their behavior in spending the remittances so that it's more consistent with the migrant's preference? So in order to answer these two questions, we use a methodology called randomized controlled trial. So we recruited more than 4,000 OFWs in UAE into our study sample. And then we randomly assign we assign them into two groups. And because it's random, these two groups are comparable in a series of baseline characteristics, such as the average income, education level, age, gender, etc., etc. And then one of the group received the intervention, so the labeling feature, and the other group did not. So these other groups served as the control group. And then after the study period, which was several months, we then compared if there's any differences in terms of remittance volume and household expenditures between these two groups. And because these two groups were comparable at baseline, so if we found any differences, right, at the end of the study, then we can attribute this difference to the effect of the intervention. And so the first step, how did we get to this more than 4,000 OFWs in our study? So we conducted intercept point sampling in the streets and remittance charger in UAE. So we actually met this OFW face to face, and we interviewed them at the baseline. Oh, it says that my connection is unstable. I hope you can still hear me. And then when we interviewed them, we also collected contact information of someone in the households that they remitted to, because we would need to conduct a phone survey with the household as well at the end line. And we eventually recruited 4,458 OFWs in our study. And more than 2,000 of their households also participated in the study. Okay, but then how do we make labeling happen? You may think that the simplest way to make labeling happen may be that if all the remittance centers or all the banks, they can just add this labeling feature as part of their system, so that when people send money, right, they can add the label to specify how the money should be spent. That would be great. That would be the best way to implement labeling. However, that wasn't available. There wasn't an available option. And so what we did is we designed and developed a mobile application, Padala, an app. So we call it Padala. It's a remittance recording app. So there is no transaction happening in the app at all. It's just for, it's like bookkeeping. It's just for OFWs to keep records of their remittance transactions. And we asked all of participants to use this app during the baseline. And to show you a little bit more about the design of this app. So as you can see, in the app, the users can upload the receipt of their remittances, and then they can enter information, including the recipient, the amount, and the date. And if they form a habit of recording their remittances, they would then be able to keep track of like a list of their remittances sent to different recipients. And as you may remember earlier, I said that we split the participants into two groups, right? And then only half of them had access to labeling. And how do we make that happen? So actually, for those in the treatment group, they have one additional feature in their app, which is when they record the remittance, they can also add labels. As you can see on this graph, here add labels, and they can choose whatever label they want. We have a list of predetermined labels, but they can also specify anything else they want. So it could be like education, rent, utility, or sometimes people say donation to a church. It can be anything else. And they can specify an amount for that label. And then this label will be sent to the recipient via a free SMS in the Philippines. So here on this picture, you will see an example of this standardized message. So say, for example, dear header, or whoever the recipient is, Yuna has sent you 20,000 peso on this date, and 2,000 peso designated for education, right? So this label is basically a message that will then be delivered to the recipient via SMS. And the migrant can also edit the content in this message as they see fit. They also have the option to send this message in other apps. So only half of the respondents have this feature in the app, and the other half did not, and that's the control group. And then we asked all of our respondents to use this app for 30 weeks, and that's what we call the follow-up period. after which we conducted the N9 survey. And just to summarize all the data sources that go into the analysis, we had the baseline survey and the remittance data collected in PadaLab, and the N9 survey, this data from the OFWs. And we also have the N9 survey data from this OFW's family back home in the Philippines. We also partner with one major remittance center in UAE, UAE Exchange, to obtain admin data of remittance transactions. So we use all of this data to run analysis and to evaluate whether or not labeling is actually working. Okay, so here is the result, right? So first question, did labeling actually increase remittances? So we found that the ability to label remittances actually led only those migrants with low baseline level of remittance activity to increase their remittance levels. Right? So for those who, like at baseline, send less remittance than the medium level, there was a positive effect of labeling. Right? After having access, they then send more money. But for the migrants who had higher remittance levels, so they used to already send a lot of remittance. For them, there was no changes. So labeling did not really work on the second group. We also found that income kind of plays a role as well. So migrants with relatively higher income, they experience significant increase in their remittance levels. But this effect did not occur on those who have lower income. So basically, the labeling function had some effects on some subgroups, but not if we look at the whole sample as a whole. Right. Second question: did that then change the behavior of the recipients? And we found that labeling remittance does not actually lead to higher expenditures on users that migrants identify as priority items, which was consistent across the full sample and between subgroups. And ultimately, even though we saw some positive impact on some categories, for example, medical expenses, but we didn't see that in other categories. And it's not clear to us why there's in terms of effects that is only mixed or weak evidence that labeling as implemented in this study led to actual changes in household expenditures. Yeah, and as a result out that labeling did not have the intended effect on household expenditure, and then they may choose to reduce their remittance, meaning that the initially positive impact may then decline over time. And the possibility of these declining effects suggests that it would be important to continue to monitor the remittances over a longer time frame than what we did in this study. In this study, what we did was a 7-month follow-up period. And lastly, I would just like to share with you some qualitative insights from some interviews that I did with our OFW participants in UAE. So this is the quote from one of our participants when we asked them what they think about PadaLab. And she said, I have been in UAE for 14 years, but I never monitor how much I had been sending to my parents. Neither I nor my parents can tell how much I have sent home over the years. And now I think if I had been using PadaLab all these years, I would know. And now I can also use the labels such as how much for medicines, how much for food, so that I know how much we are spending on each category. And this is, even though we've only conducted a small number of qualitative interviews, a common theme that come up in all of these interviews is that they really appreciate the remittance recording function of the app, which may suggest interest and demand for products that help OFW better keep track of their remittances and to help them better plan and track the uses of the remittances together with their families at home. And I hope this insight might be useful for those of you who are considering your own innovations.
I think it would be very useful. Thank you, Miss Yuna. Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, you have one last one. You have one last slide. Did you have one more slide?
Yeah, I just want to say that we are also adding like a follow-up study using the same sample to understand the risk coping role of remittance amid the pandemic. Yeah, and we hope to be able to share the results from this new follow-up study also one day.
Yes, we would look forward to that. And the lab is really very interesting. When we look at financial inclusion, usually we look at savings, payments, especially when it comes to digital finance. But this is very interesting because it's focused on remittances. And yeah, thank you very much for that, Yuna. So we'll go into open forum later. For our social innovators, our participants today, if you have some questions in mind already, please type it on our chat box. I have a few already in here. So just feel free to put in your questions there. So last but not the least, I want to call on Prof. Rob Nadal. Prof. Rob Nadal is a Human Resource Director at the Bleeley Family Foundation and Senior Lecturer at the Department of Social Work, UP Diliman. Assistant Professor 2, College of Social Work and Community Development, Senior Consultant of DIS FTC, that's Building Inclusive Zones for Farming Communities, worked with Institute for Studies in Asian Church and Culture, ABS-CBN Foundation, Philippine Business for Social Program, Voluntary Service Overseas, Oxfam, Head of Corporate Social Responsibility also for Globe, long list here, Vice President for Community Banking of PPI Globe Banco, Regional Development Advisor of Voluntary Service Overseas. Oh, I think that's repeated. Okay, so again, welcome. Prof. Rob will be talking about 4Ps use cases.
Right. This would, yeah. Thank you, Leah. Thank you, Elmer, for inviting, and yeah, thanks, Nas and Yuna for sharing those fantastic researches on digital financial inclusion. This is just a short sharing of a project I did some 5-6 years ago with the Department of Social Welfare and Development. It was a result of negotiations with then Secretary Dinky Suleiman on how the private sector can support the Sustainable Livelihoods Program of DSWD. So for those who are not very familiar with SLP or Sustainable Livelihoods Program, so it's the graduation program for the 4Ps program. So 4Ps would be your cash relief program that would hand out 1,400 pesos every month, but the payout would happen every 2 months because of the sheer challenge of mobilizing the beneficiaries and having the microfinance institutional partners to be doing the payout. No? So what we did, the use case for my company at that time, the BPI Globe Banco, the joint venture between Banco Philippine Islands and Globe Telecom, that started the very first mobile-based banking platform using USSD. No? So it's not yet the app, it's sending SMS messages, no? and using basic phones to actually be putting money into an electronic wallet. So what we pitched to then Secretary Dinky Suleiman was we will conduct the financial literacy education session for the 4Ps beneficiaries considered um, part of the cohort to be graduated during their payout sessions. And but we negotiated that instead of just doing it as a one-off financial literacy session for half an hour, that we be granted the opportunity to give the audience the option to open a bank account, the very first bank account of their life, with the minimal requirement of their DSWD ID for their human identity, for the Know Your Customer process, and the payment of application fee or bank opening fee of 50 pesos, which covers the cost of the ATM card. But the SIM card for the mobile-based wallet or bank account would be given for free. But they will be required to make an initial deposit of 50 pesos. So all in all, the deal was for the company to provide the financial literacy session so that gives DSWD a lot of savings in terms of paying trainers and partnering with NGOs to conduct the FinLit, because the company will be doing it for free. But also the endorsement to do it during payout sessions and family development sessions. So the minimum requirement is for the 4Ps beneficiaries to bring their DSWD ID and 50 pesos of bank account opening fee and make the initial behavior of putting money into mobile-based bank account. And so that's what we did. And to make it easy, so no complicated financial literacy lectures, we just developed a mnemonic using the bank or the name of the bank and following the principle of persuasive selling format. So it's a technology of selling used by Procter & Gamble for their fast-moving consumer goods sector. So what we did was develop this mnemonic. We also produce leave behind flyers that would have at the back like talking points of what the lecturer would actually be talking about during the 30-minute lecture. So it goes like this, very simple. So bakit ka nandito? Why are you here? So that's a question addressed to the participants. And then they will be asked, A, ano ang pangarap mo? So what are their aspirations in life? And next is N, needs versus wants. So there would be a visual that shows needs versus wants. And then the financial literacy equation of kita minus ipon equals gastos. So whatever they earn, and we use the payout amount as an example. So the environment would be very apt to ask that question kasi they will be receiving 1,400 or 2,800 if it's by every other month. And that's their kita, no? And then they will be asked, no? So for example, what could be your goal-based savings? And we will use as an example the initial deposit requirement to open account, which is 50 pesos. So whatever their kita, you minus whatever is the goal-based savings equals the gastos, or what you will be using for your expense budgeting. So here you can see kita minus ipon equals gastos. So at the back of one of these leave behind flyers would be a simple example of how you can do simple expense budgeting for the family, but deducting first your goal-based savings. And the example we give is 50 pesos. So no matter what you earn, as a minimum wage earner or some part-time work, take out 50 pesos. Why 50 pesos? Because at that time, that was the minimum amount allowed for any Banco customer to go to a usual remittance center to do cash in or top up. No? It cannot be called deposit at the time because of a BSP ruling, so it's called cash in. But we explained that that is essentially your savings. No? So and then lastly is an assumptive clause. So what are you waiting for? Open a savings account now. So this was the pitch we made to then Secretary Dinky Soliman, and we argued that financial literacy will not happen or behavior change will not happen if there is no practical way to really be saving. No? So it cannot be the piggy bank. So we've done that before, and it's very vulnerable for low income, uninsured families. No? So it has to be a bank account. And since at the time, so when the bank was still existing, it was regulated by the Banco Central. Therefore, the savings of any customer will be insured up to 500,000 pesos. So all the value propositions are there for the 4-piece beneficiary to consider. And the promotion of the habit of savings was an easy sell because they always see the cash in points everywhere they go, particularly in convergence points, whether it's the market, the terminal for their public transport, or near the school or whatnot. So the idea of having their first bank account, the idea of getting immediately, being gratified in exchange for your 100 pesos, you get your ATM card and you get a text message that you're now a customer of BPI Globe Banco, became a hit to many payout events and family development sessions that we went to. Here is a clipping of, I think this was sometime in September, October when we did the official launch. At that time, we already acquired 50,000 4-piece beneficiaries, and out of the 50,000, 44,000 have kept their savings in their wallet. And by the time we ended the program, close to a year, so we were close to 200,000. So we actually had 180,000 acquired 4-piece beneficiaries. At the time, it was very easy to remember how to go to your mobile-based wallet. It was star 118, star 118 pound sign, and then there you would have your electronic wallet, so you can see the balance, you can do send money, buy load, pay bills, loans, etc. Right. So what have we learned? Okay, so one is there are ease of use issues, and secondly there are and cash in points. All right, so what do we mean by this? Ease of use issues is that we learned, because at the time we were so driven to acquire the account, we were not aware that many of the households were sharing phones. Therefore, people putting in and out prepaid SIM cards. And sometimes SIM cards can get ruined or get lost in the process of phones being exchanged by multiple users in one household. And some of the 4-piece beneficiaries didn't really get used to operating or navigating even through the USSD-based electronic wallet. I'm not sure if the digital app now is as intuitive or more intuitive to them than it was before during USSD and using the basic phone. But it was the number one cause of the accounts being dormant after a while. Second is friction cost. We acquired accounts during payout sessions or family development sessions of DSWD, and it was not really their usual environment. So there's no telling if there are cash in points very near their residence, right? So we found out that the number two reason for dormancy or churn would be this challenge of having to find a very convenient location, a cash-in point that would accept regular cash-in behavior, even if they want to continue in their habit of savings. Of course, consumer protection and servicing. At that time, 5, 6 years ago, um, call center services of mobile accounts or mobile wallet companies like BPI Globanco were not as robust as it is today, where you have other like C3 call centers that can do it for you. So we were doing it on our own. So we have like maybe like 8 seats of call center agents manning the booths and getting calls to support clients. And for people who are not really used to calling a call center for whatever, maybe a PIN change, PIN change, um, or your SIM was blocked, therefore you cannot access your mobile wallet. So those things. All right. Need for bank and unbank integration. So one of the things we realized or learned was that you can actually address the cash in issue if the ecosystem, those people who need to pay, who need to transfer funds to an unbanked person will do it digitally also. No? Unlike today, during the pandemic scenario, it's now very easy. You don't need to convince people to pay you digitally. They will even ask you if they can pay you via GCash or PayMaya or whatnot. And then barriers to entry. So this is something we've realized that not all have bring their IDs, for example, during payout sessions or family development sessions, and signal can also be an issue even at the time that 2G signal was the only requirement for this USSD platform. Even that can sometimes be an issue for some of the customers. And finally, low daily and monthly active usage. So realize that we were good at acquiring, but we were not good in retaining the customer. So this is really a function of customer relationship management, the way outbound marketing can actually be pursued to make sure that the customer is retained. There is also the high churn rate. So at that time, if for example your mobile wallet is attached to a SIM, and if you're not using that SIM, you're not loading that SIM for 3 months, there's an automatic churn, meaning that SIM will be killed by the telco. And so with the account, so the account can be suspended. So you don't have access to your account because your account is your telco number. So what we did, what happened was, so we had very good numbers in terms of acquisition, but through time, so we experienced churn, people not doing anything with their accounts, therefore the dormancy would take effect after some time. And then people losing their SIMs, losing their ATM cards, not knowing how to call, how to use the call center, so on and so forth. Right. So that was the experience. But I'm
Thank
sure
you.
things have been have are now very different with the Ayuda, with the SAP 1 and 2, and I'm really looking forward to what the story will be for the current people handling the SWD and the digital players. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Rob. So I guess you could say it's a little bit more promising to keep the four-piece beneficiaries bank or say bank, but still a big challenge for them to use it for transactions and hopefully for savings as well. So we now open the floor to our participants, our social innovators, for your questions. Actually have one question here well, first of all, we'd like to let you all know that our panelists have been generous enough to share their slides, so we will definitely send a copy to Sam, to Dev, and or so we can share it to everyone. So there's a question for IPA. I think this is for Dr. Nash. What is IPA's insights on a criticism backed by studies claiming that microcredit has been a tool of exclusion rather than inclusion for the population in the base of pyramid or the bottom of the pyramid due to some performance indicators forcing microfinance institutions to increase number of reloans? Okay, so in effect, it has driven poor households into debt, like what you mentioned earlier, into a debt trap, in some cases even leading to suicide. Okay, how does innovators intending to offer microcredit address this dilemma? That's a load of
Yeah, thanks for that question. And I think that's really the central point also of the presentation, right? Like you have two sides of the debate. You have people who very much support microcredit, and they really believe in microcredit, that it's the silver bullet to end poverty. And you also have this group of people who see it as something that could potentially be more harmful, especially if you're putting more people in debt and they're not able to manage the debts that they have because of microcredit. So I think these are two sides of the debate. The results have shown that that we see, especially in the 7 randomized controlled trials that were conducted, as I mentioned, one of which was in the Philippines. And we saw that actually there were no harmful effects of microcredit. But in terms of the promise of ending poverty, it may not live to that. And while there has been some tricky thinking, it's because of the conventional way of delivering microcredit. And I think that's where innovation is very important. And I think digital finance is actually quite interesting, right? What would microcredit look like through digital finance and digital credit? And I think some of the studies also show that in order to mitigate some of the potential harmful effects, maybe one study that was done where you delay the delivery time of the loan for clients to think about their loan more carefully, or you give them more information, clear information about what they're getting into, what is the fine print of this credit products, right? For them to be very much aware of the interest of what their the payment terms. And there are many different potential innovations in this space, depending on the sector that you're trying to work with. If you're trying to work in the agriculture sector, for example, you can look at the situation of farmers. When do they get their income? How are they able to pay? Right? Maybe giving them flexible loan payments terms would be very helpful for them. And I think that's the important thing. We have to have a human-centered design when it comes to these kinds of products, and at the same time thinking about consumer protection in a way that you're able to really provide the information to people make sure that they're not susceptible to, different, problems that can be faced, when you enter, these types of products. And at the same time, you want to build trust. So I think the more that you are transparent to clients and beneficiaries, the better. Yeah. So definitely, I guess in terms of advice, we need more testing. Now we need to test more financial products that are human centered.
Okay, thank you. We'll go on a bit of an overtime, but just a few more questions here. So most studies nowadays, like studies of ADB Insurance Commission, for example, claim that there's an increasing level of awareness among the poor population on microinsurance as instruments of financial inclusion and resilience. But such studies are just using FGDs or surveys with just 100 or 500 population samples. Does IPE intend to gather evidences in this to increase awareness through randomized controlled trials as a gold standard of impact evaluation? Any plans around microinsurance? I guess that is the question.
Okay. Yeah. So we were actually, we were trying to test several microinsurance products as well. I think one was with ASCII in Cabanatuan. And the take-up was quite promising there. People were very much interested in microinsurance, especially I think we were trying to add it on to a product, I think with BPI as well. And so there seems to be, a lot of promise on microinsurance, but we don't see a lot of that, I think, being designed, appropriately for lower income households. So I think that's the question there. Sorry, I didn't quite get the other bits of the question. Maybe something about randomized control.
Yes. I guess that it's more of the effectiveness of the studies that have been done. Mostly were FGDs or surveys with just 100 to 500 population samples. So it was just given as an example. So,
Right.
But the basic question is, does IPE intend to gather evidence in this area?
Right. Yeah. So yeah, I guess for us, we really believe in testing and using randomized control trials since it is the gold standard. We also believe in qualitative type of studies because I think that gives you a lot of depth. When you're running quantitative type of surveys and studies as well. So I think it's really trying to complement how you gather data, but at the same time making sure that when you say impact, you can establish causality, right? And when you establish causality, there are no questions on how you were able to establish it. Kumbaga wala kang mga butas. Diba? When you come up with these studies, because people can poke holes on your study if you're not able to implement it well. And so at the end of the day, that's why we believe in RCTs, because it's the most straightforward, it's the most simple way of establishing causality.
Thank you, Dr. Nash. The next question is for Prof. Rob. What are the success factors in acquiring beneficiaries or platform users of Banco?
Based on our experience, the persuasive selling format was very effective. So it was very straightforward. This is your situation. We are your best bet to owning your first bank account. Owning your first bank account is as easy as 1, 2, 3. You need a DSWID. You need a 50 pesos opening fee and a 50 pesos initial deposit. And 3, you just need a cell phone, a basic phone, and we'll even give you a free SIM card if you like. So it was very easy. We were endorsed by our partner DSWD, and we even had YouTube video demonstration of how the account can be used, where to go to top it up for cash in, and the many other use cases for the account. You can send money, you can buy load, and buying load will give you an automatic 10% versus if you buy it from your favorite mom and pop store. So it was a very easy. The ATM card that you get for your initial opening fee of 50 pesos in initial deposit was really an instant gratification. People who never had the chance to own a bank account would finally have their own bank account. So it was a very good experience. It's just that we were, I guess, ahead of our time in terms of the availability of cash in point. So a digital account will really die if you don't have partner agents to go to exchange your physical money to digital money. And then the time was not yet ready for the ecosystem to really be enabling digital wallets to thrive, right? So you don't find a lot of commerce happening and transactions happening using mobile money or digital money at that time. Um, you can't even convince the SWD and Land Bank to do their payouts via digital. But now, look, they're the ones, no, DSWD, Land Bank, they're the ones, chasing the telcos to, distribute money for them because they cannot do it because of the virus. So yun. So sayang, it would have been, an exciting time to operate at that time.
Thank you, Prof. Rob.
This time, I mean.
I'm going to call on Cherry Morillon to bring up your question. This one is for Miss Yuna. Cherry, would you like to speak up?
Yeah. I've seen that there's a lot of apps already in the marketplace or in the like Google Play and iOS, but very few are using it, especially in the province. So, what are your considerations in like uh, uh, technology development or like financial technology that kind of be a use case on kasi it's because like right now even with the SAP they're distributing it through Palawan and Cebuana Lulier uh, but they haven't utilized like the digital platform. So how is it compared with the existing app, and how can you consider it na this is the solution for those people who are not yet aware of it? So I've seen that Padala app is in iOS and Google Play, uh, but it's my first time to hear it. So what are your considerations on that?
Right. Thank you for the question, Cherry. And you're definitely right that it's not easy to recruit people to use a new product. Actually, in our study, Padalab was only used by the OFWs in UAE. So we did not. So for the participants who are in the Philippines, they did not use the app, and that was by design. But even when we try to persuade our OFW participants to use the app, I have to admit that it was quite challenging, and we had to. I think we at least tested our strategies 3 times before we launched the study to find out what are the best strategies to incentivize the app use and to promote take-up. So I would think first of all to have enough sufficient testing to know the needs of your audience and to really understand what is stopping them from picking up the product and how best to improve their user experience. But I think the other aspect of the question that you mentioned in terms of in general digital financial products and the take up in the Philippines, I think actually if you consider how many people are using Facebook you would know that actually there are enough people who are tech savvy enough to use apps. But of course, I think like a new digital financial app, that could be something more sophisticated, but we've also seen a lot of example of studies done in other countries where I think even Nash mentioned one of the study in her presentation where effective training at the take up or at the start of the program can actually help people use the product more. And this kind of training, because it's coupled with a specific product, it can actually be more useful than like financial education that is not coupled with a product. So it may actually be more effective when you can demonstrate a specific product and you can show them the steps, and people can continue to use this product right after the training. Yeah, and I believe a lot of these efforts are being done. But of course, we should still make more efforts to find out how best to promote these kind of products as well.
Thank
Can I have
you,
a follow-up? Sorry.
Follow up. Go ahead. Quick follow up.
Do you suggest that because there's also the localized app that we call that depending on the location, because I've been to the far like island location in the Philippines, like for example uh, Mindoro and Romblon. They don't have banks there. They go to the mainland to like uh, get their salary or their payment. Even the teachers go to the mainland, or they have a liaison to get their payment from the mainland and go back to the island. So I'm thinking of a solution that would at least is kind of I'll get the money credited to my account and use it also to buy things without really having cash in, because the risk of bringing all the cash when you go to inter island, and how can you secure that? So that's one consideration. So do you think that having a localized app is kind of another possible solution, or what do you suggest?
I think it's a good point that the cost of cashing in what you have in the app can actually discourage people from using it. And of course, if there is an ecosystem in the province or in whatever location where people can use cashless payment very easily, conveniently, if every service store can accept this cashless payment, of course, that's the perfect scenario. Yeah, I guess that to build that ecosystem may take more time, and also internet connection itself also pose a challenge. Yeah, I think eventually we all want to reach a point where nobody need to cash in. We can all go around with our phone and complete all of our transactions. Yeah, it's just that it may take time for us to get there.
Thank you. So we'll just take this last question from Lance. Lance, would you like to speak up for
Yes,
your
sure.
question?
Okay. Hi. So I would just like to clarify that would this mean that we're looking for an education intervention since our stakeholders we mentioned that our stakeholders are unaware, and that also IPA mentioning that financial education is a good solution in addressing the accessibility of financial resources, and you also placed that financial literacy was a good solution in your problem analysis framework. So are we looking for an education intervention?
So I think from from the evidence that we have, if you are implementing a conventional financial education program, it doesn't seem to make a lot of impact, right? Especially since it's, you ask people to come and attend a classroom setting type of financial education program. Maybe it's targeted at OFWs or a certain group of people, maybe 4Ps. If it's not tied to a specific product, or for example, a specific financial product, we sometimes see that there's barely any impact or change in behavior of the the participants to this financial education. So we have to be a little bit careful as well. There's a lot of interest in financial education. From different sectors, we see and different organizations implementing several financial education programs. But we really have to be careful about that because it's very costly, and the interest of participants is actually very low also. And I think the main reason is why maybe they don't really see the benefits of attending these types of programs. But as Yuna mentioned, if you have a specific product, um, and you want people to take up this product, it's very helpful to work with a certain group of participants or clients or target beneficiaries and help them learn how to use that product. It doesn't have to be financial education program. It doesn't have to be a classroom type of activity. It could be that social workers go to the house and teach them how to use mobile money accounts, right? Or how to separate your expenses, create wallets within your mobile money account, where you have a wallet for expenses, you have a wallet for savings, and all of these other things, right? In teaching them those things, that's also something that can be done. So there are many ways to go about it. But definitely going the conventional route hasn't been so great, in terms of impact. And so this is, I think, the time for us to innovate and think about, what are the things that we can do. Make sure that we also look at the evidence and what it has taught us so far, and test. You have to test really whether the products that we are thinking about is addressing needs of the beneficiaries and clients that we're trying to reach.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much also, Lance, for that question. So now, before we close, I'd like to call Sam for some reminders.
Sige po. Thank you, Miss Leia. Wait lang po. I'll just remove the spotlights. Okay, so hi everyone. Thank you for coming in today's activity. So we appreciate you learning with us. Ayan. So again, I am Samantha and I am your friendly neighborhood community manager for this innovation challenge. So as I've mentioned yesterday during our kickoff discussion, we would like to encourage everyone to record your insights in our insight board. I will our link here. Ayan. Para you can also like record your insights, your learnings during the sessions. And also we can use it in formulating your how might we question on Thursday. So just a reminder everyone, so in our chat box, so please do fill out our insight boards. Thank you.
Sam, are you gonna take a group photo?
Yes po. Ayan. Sige po. So everybody, can you please turn on your videos? So, ayan. So, group photo for this one. Konting patience lang. We have like 2 pages of attendees. We're so happy that you're all here. Sige po. A few more. Kindly open your videos. Or okay lang na pangalan niyo yung nakalabas sa picture. Ayan. Sige po. So while we are waiting, again, we will post the presentations in our Financing the Future Library na ibibigay sa akin ni Miss Leah in a while. So, just check out our library for the resources. Thank you. Okay, so I think we're ready. So, first page. 1, 2, smile, 3. One more for safety. Okay, next page po. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so thank you very much. Ayan. Okay na po, Miss.
Okay, thank you, Sam. So before I let everyone go, I would just like to hear from our panelists who have been very gracious enough today to spend this time with us. But maybe you can give a last piece of advice to our social innovators before we let them all go. Starting with you, Dr. Nash.
Thank you so much for inviting us. We're very happy to be here and great to hear from everyone as well. I think what we want to really highlight is the importance of testing. Testing, if you're planning an innovative product, make sure to test it. But at the same time, when you're testing, make sure that you're using rigorous methodology as well, so that you would have the accurate results that you're looking for. And also take time to look at the evidence out there, especially on financial inclusion. IPA has a website where you can look at all of the studies that we've conducted, and most of the studies are already published in our website. We also have our policy briefs in our website as well. So these are all available if you want to take a look at them. It's at poverty-action.org.
Thank you very much. Ms. Yuna, last piece of advice for our social innovators.
Yeah, and well, echo everything that Nash has said. And I think just one last point, I guess, just spend as much time as you need to get to know your audience or whoever you're trying to serve, and understand what they need and the constraints that they face. Because the type of constraints that they face can sometimes be the ones that we cannot imagine ourselves without going out in the field and get to know them, and get to see the community. Yeah, and good luck to all of you for your innovation.
Thank you. Thank you. For all, finally, please give your last piece of advice to our social innovators.
Yeah. So the problem you're addressing is to improve the access to financial resources and services. So you need to be obsessed with your target customer. So I posted in the chat box what you need to consider when you look at the situation of your target customer. So you need to look at their condition, their limitations, their opportunities, and their needs. And construct your product or maybe your recommendation for an existing product to be improved. So the product construct only follows after you have assessed the situation of your target audience. So that's primary. So who's going to use it? What are their pain points currently? And how do you bring them from point A to point B where they can be more accessible? The products could be more accessible, available, and affordable. You can use all those things to guide. Thank you. Good luck.
Thank you very much, and thank you for everyone for staying for the whole session. So good luck, and then reminding everyone that we have another brown bag session on December 8th, which will focus on innovations in this time of the pandemic, and we'll introduce some more personas for you to hear about. So again, good evening and enjoy the rest of your week. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Alvin.